This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
Making Australia a renewable energy superpower is the fastest way to cut pollution and the most effective way to act on climate change.
The politics of energy policy was once driven by climate change and culture wars. Now it is driven by more mundane concerns, like prices.
Our plan is comprehensive and fully costed. It will save families an average $275 a year on power bills.
With a balanced energy mix under the coalition, it'll be 44% cheaper. That's $263 billion less than what would otherwise have to be paid under Labor's plan.
The release of the Coalition's nuclear plan has now focused the energy debate almost exclusively on its cost and the relative cost of Labor's plan.
They were promised a $275 reduction in household power bills, but families are paying up to $1,000 more than what Labor had promised them.
But the Coalition's sustained attack on the Labor $275 promise fell somewhat flat on Friday when it could not say how much prices would fall as a result of their plan in the near term.
We'll have more to say about our energy policy in relation to the near term, because it's incredibly important that people get help now, and we're determined to do that.
Even though the opposition can have fun with the $275 saving, the idea that gas and nuclear are the way to lower prices is simply nonsensical. I mean, they are not the cheapest form of energy. They may not be the most expensive if O'Brien's right, but they do not bring prices down.
What's the price that nuclear power station needs to break even? And the price that they need is almost double what customers are paying right now for their wholesale energy. And therefore, that means that their electricity bill would need to go up somewhere in the realm of about $665 a year on average.
Friday's announcement has raised even more questions about how nuclear power would affect the energy system and the economy. Coal, once the mainstay of power production, is now providing around 46% of energy in the national electricity market, while about 17% comes from gas. The government forecasts a system where renewables will provide over 94% of energy by 2050, but the Coalition's modelling presumes it will peak at 54%. But we have already reached a point where about 35% of Australia's electricity comes from solar, wind and hydropower, including from the 4 million households that have solar panels on their roof, saving $3 billion a year on electricity bills. The capping of the amount of renewables in the energy system under the Coalition would change the way energy sources like solar feed into the system, and that would have real-world consequences for those millions of households who have solar systems.
We are very concerned because the initial modelling shows that up to 2/3 of every solar system installed in Australia today will be shut off every single day under Peter Dutton's nuclear plan.
There are other crucial differences in the energy map outlined by the Coalition. Labor says most coal-fired power stations will be closed by 2034. The Coalition would keep them running longer, until around 2039, while nuclear reactors were being constructed.
We shouldn't be closing our baseload power stations prematurely as we continue to roll out renewables.
But energy experts and the companies that run the coal-fired plants say this is not viable, that the rapidly ageing plants are already very unreliable, as well as unprofitable. State governments are already paying out hundreds of millions of dollars to keep some of them open.
And even on the most optimistic outlook, nuclear power won't be ready in time for the exit of Australia's coal-fired power stations.
The comments I've made publicly is not don't do nuclear, it's more that I think nuclear can't really fill the role of coal, in the sense that coal can't last until you have nuclear power available.
The second crucial difference goes to the cost and shape of the transmission system. The opposition argues that the government's plan doesn't include the cost of a rebuilt transmission network. But it also argues there will be huge cost savings with its plan because the 7 proposed nuclear reactors can be located at the sites of old coal-fired power stations and simply plugged in. It's not that simple. Those transmission lines are already being used for other purposes.
The sites where the coal-fired power stations are today will be used the transmission system will be used. So by the time you get to putting in place nuclear, it'll have the same problem that solar and wind have today. There's where can you put them and where's the best place to connect them to the electricity grid.
The next problem is the question of cost. The coalition disputed recent figures produced by the CSIRO and the energy market operator. The CSIRO and AEMO went back and redid the figures, but came back to the same stark conclusion when they released their latest assessment last week.
Nuclear power does not currently provide the most cost-competitive solution for low-emission electricity in Australia. Long development lead times mean nuclear won't be able to make a significant contribution to achieving net zero emissions by 2050.
Peter Dutton wants you to believe that he can introduce the most expensive form of energy and somehow that will reduce power prices. AEMO and the CSIRO say nuclear is expensive. Peter Dutton and Ted O'Brien say it's cheap. I know who I believe, and I think I know who the Australian people will believe as well.
The Coalition's costings have been modelled on the basis of an estimated ongoing generation cost, not the much higher costs associated with a first-of-a-kind build. The CSIRO estimates the nation's first large-scale nuclear power plant could cost as much as $17 billion in today's dollars and would not be operational until at least 2040. The Coalition's plan is also forecast to deliver 45% less power than Labor's, arguing Labor is overestimating the demand for energy.
Labor is assuming that 98% of all new vehicle sales will be EVs. They are basically assuming that the Australian people will be forced to behave in the way that the Labor Party want them to behave.
The Liberal Party has just assumed that the Australian people will need less electricity in 2050 than AEMO has suggested would be prudent to plan for. It runs the risk of leaving Australians short of the energy they need. We need to be planning an energy system for economic growth.
Perhaps the starkest difference, though, is in who will own or finance this proposed energy system. The Coalition is proposing a massive government intervention into what is now a largely privately owned and run energy sector. Taxpayers wouldn't just be footing the bill through their electricity bills and higher taxes, but would be exposed to the potentially huge cost blowouts which have plagued most nuclear power plant builds.
Probably a more likely model in reality, which is going to be government's going to subsidise these nuclear power stations like they do in every other country, and then in the end it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. So as an electricity consumer, you might see a lower electricity bill, but you'll cop it on your tax bill instead.